this is Good Connection with Medievalist.net, and I am delighted to be here with Barbara Hanawalt. She's Professor of British History at Ohio State University. Many medievalists will know her and have read her works such as Growing Up in Medieval London and Ties That Bound, Peasant Families in Medieval England. Just one of many books and articles you've read, you've written over the years, and it's a real honor to have you speak with us.
Thank you.
You're well known as one of the kind of most important social historians about the Middle Ages, and I wondered, how did you get involved in kind of decide that's kind of an area that you wanted to study?
Who did farming. So I knew a lot growing up about village dynamics. I knew a lot about agriculture, and that just seemed to be natural to begin my work studying peasants.
Mm-hmm. You found their lives fairly interesting too.
Yes, yeah. So when I finished the book on crime, it ended up with two questions that I thought were interesting. One of them was why the peasant families didn't kill each other. And the other one was, why are women so underrepresented in criminal cases? And these led me to study the questions of what was the peasant family like? And that led me to the ties that bound. And the criminal records led me to the coroner's inquests. The coroner's inquests, the first book I looked at homicide, but when I looked at homicide, I realized there are all these cases of accidental death. Cases of accidental death are like reading a very short synopsis. It's like a snapshot, a little vignette of what's going on in a person's life. And that vignette tells you exactly what they're doing when they die. And that just opened the whole intimate view of what peasant life was like. The first of the articles I wrote on that came at the same time that everybody was interested in what the history of childhood was like. And I had information from the coroner's rolls that people thought they would never know. That is, what was a child's life like for the peasantry, or for the lower classes. So my first article then was on child rearing among the lower classes in late medieval England.
It's again, I've read a lot of your works, and a lot of them focus on London, because it's
Yes.
London, and I've worked on the coroner's rolls there myself. And can you talk about what a kind of interesting place it is just for as a medievalist being able to do research and the records you can have access to that city alone?
I think that the study of London came about because, actually, by the time I finished The Ties That Bound, I had enough of peasants. but I had a lingering question. Well, I knew a lot about the childhood of peasants and adulthood. I didn't know very much about the adolescent years. London was an obvious place because there are all of these records of apprenticeship. So London then became a focus of my studies for the next phase of research. I had a Guggenheim in 88, 89. So I spent the year in London. I just worked through archive stuff. I collected a lot of archive material, not just on childhood and youth, also on women, and also on the current project of what were the men doing. So I sort of was looking at initially doing a whole life course analysis in London, and that proved to be too much. London records are very, very complete. They presuppose the usual problem that records of this sort do. That is, if you're working with records that are essentially court rolls, you're always dealing with people who are somewhat in trouble.
Yes, yeah.
Or they're dead, as in the coroner's rolls. So I try to augment that with a fair amount of literary sources, which is why I come to a conference like this, because I dabble in both worlds without being an expert at all in literature. But I use a lot of the literary sources for the Growing Up in Medieval London For instance, I use a lot of the advice books, which are mostly directed to young men. Then and London has a whole range of interesting records. There are mayor's court rules. There are the letter books where they extract the more important cases that come before them. They're what I sometimes call an executive session. Then there are the recorders of London, who, while they're officials of London, they also write very reflective books about the laws of London. And that I've been using a great deal now. Liber Albus is perhaps the most famous of these, but some of the others are very, very interesting, and they include things that are reflections on what the nature of government ought to be. And then when you read these, you realize this is also reflected in the court cases. That when they make a judgment, they're also adding this sort of information that says, in a city where you have this type of government, this is the sort of government, this is the sort of relationship to power that there ought to be. So it's turned out to be a very interesting project.
Yeah, and we're here at the fourth annual Chaucer Seminar at the University of Toronto. You're giving a paper later on today, but I'll just talk about some of the research that you're kind of starting up now, just like kind of various aspects that you're working on and want to share too.
Yes, the current project is civic ceremonial and the development of a civic culture in London. The civic ceremonial that I'm interested in is mostly that ceremonial that involves the election of the mayor or the sheriff. I'm very interested in the livery that was worn. I'm interested in the guilds and how they discipline members, how they train apprentices, how they keep their members in line. I'm interested in the relationship of the mayor to the crown, which is a very fraught relationship, very different from continental Europe. In continental Europe, a lot of these cities were independent. London is not. London is relying on the king for their charter. The king can come in and revoke that charter. So those sorts of dynamics are interesting, the dynamics between mayor and crown, mayor and guilds, and then mayor and the population, because London has a population of people who come in, they're strangers to the city. No early modern city, no pre-industrial city ever replaced their own population. They were filthy places to live. People died. That meant there was always this fresh crop of people coming in.
Yes, yeah.
And how do you educate them? How do you tell them what urban life is like? How do you tell them what the laws of London are like? And London had a lot of ways of doing this. Among them was public reading of the ordinances annually. The other way was these big processions that said, here is the mayor. And when you figure there's no newspapers, the more exposure the mayor gets in public processions, the better. So you know exactly what they look like. I think the livery is another way of saying, here's authority. And the livery is distinctive. They wore it all the time when they were making their rounds. So you knew who an alderman was, unlike today. And I think the other thing, and what I'm talking about today, is sort of the negative lesson. That is, what happens if you insult the mayor? What happens if you produce bad food? Then again, it's a very public ceremonial in which you are taken to the mayor's court, you're condemned, you are then put on a hurdle, taken to the pillory. Your offending item, if it's a food item, will be hung around your neck. Or my favorite is the vintner who sold bad wine was forced to drink some. And then the rest was poured over his head.
Yeah.
So this again becomes a public lesson and a public ceremony. But it's a way of saying the didactic lesson is a lesson of don't do this. So that's what my current project is.
Well, I'll be looking forward to it, and I think many historians and followers and medieval people interested in the Middle Ages. Thank you again for all the work you've done, the great books and books you've put out.
Thank you.